one thing that I get from your description of the progression was it didn't start off, it was the be nice kind of a thing, which was sort of the religious background or pseudo-religious background. Um, was that the way the activism was too? Because now when we think of activist, I tend to think when someone says they're an activist, I tend to think angry, I tend to think sign holding, I tend to think thing throwing, and lots of things that light other things on fire. That's not the way activists used to be. Um, when you were getting into that, was it sort of the kindler, gentler, more less sensational, more principlist? And then what do you think accounts for the change?
Mm, great questions. So I think I always saw that there were kind of two sort of streams, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
of activism. There were people who were kind of, we should just be nice to people, but there always was kind of a more militant side. And I think what ended up happening is that the the way things started to fracture once the digital age really started to mature is that it became a lot easier for the militant side to really enforce their viewpoint. One, the more you're doing things online, the easier it is to forget that you're dealing with real flesh and blood people on the other side,
Mhm.
right? It's so much harder to be as really in your face, as really dogmatic about your activist perspectives when you are in face to face, person to person community with people. I didn't see as much, for example, people cutting off family members and things like that in those earlier days. There was always people who were complaining about their more conservative family members or things like that, but there wasn't this conversation of like, I am literally cutting this person out of my life. I would say before the 2010s, 2012, 2015 sort of era. I feel like that was really when the more this started to come online and the more social media became a feature of our everyday lives and organizing, that's when I think that shift really started to favor the more militant parts of the activist community, who's always been there, but we're definitely not able to, because most people don't have that in them, right? Most people are not necessarily willing to do things that are going to push them too far beyond their comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's only when we got into those echo chambers, and with digital media, the thing is you have data points. You're able to see what other people are doing. You're able to see what they're sharing or not sharing, right? So if they're not posting the black square, if they're not making a statement of a certain kind when the thing happens, whatever's trending that day, it enabled that intra-community policing that started to happen where people, and that's where you start to see the rise of cancel culture. That's when you start to see all of those shifts, because now there's this ability to really see who is saying what, who's not saying what. And it's really a lot easier to start to, within activist spaces. I can't even tell you how much conflict and just drama constantly characterize those spaces. There was always the infighting. There's always the joke on the left about circular firing squads and things like that. But it really got to another level when we had the technical tools to be able to see, oh, that person liked a comment from, the wrong side on a debate, or that person is following somebody. Why are they following XYZ? That person's a fascist. Like the more you have the ability to actually be able to really keep tabs on people, that militant faction of the activist community was really able to start to kind of discipline people to, either cancel them or push them out. So you see kind of waves of people leaving the left because there's certain events that happen, and if you don't fall in line exactly the way the militant wing of the group is going, then you're either pushed out or you decide to leave because you're like, oh, they've gone too far for me this time, right? And so that, I think, is where the shift happened, is once people got the ability to, because then they can both enforce it by kind of checking up on what people are doing. They can also bring they can basically threaten your livelihood, your safety by, if you become the target of the day, whether that's in your, sort of leftist workplace or online, they can literally ruin your life. And most people, when they're an onlooker, they're the nice people, they learn how to just say the thing, right? Oh, we're just going to, do the pronoun ritual. We're just going to go along, right? The nice people didn't go away, but they got quiet because they've seen what happened to the people who asked the wrong questions, who didn't fall in line. And so that militant group is really able to sort of drag everybody else along with them and excommunicate whoever doesn't go along. And so I think that's really what made the difference.
You anticipated one of my follow-up questions was going to be, was there a sort of a quietly roiling resentment amongst the, hey, we're not going to get militant like this, we're not going to get upset, and you sort of anticipated that question and answered that way. And I think it's fascinating because oftentimes we think, because the militancy is so pronounced, that there is a unified sense of we're all this militant, when the reality is that's actually not true.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I think that's really one of the things that was really eye-opening to me is there's, on the one hand, there were the people who kind of, once I started to go public with my doubts about all this stuff, there were a bunch of people who, cut me off and all this other kind of stuff. But then there were a lot of people in my DMs like, thank you for saying that. I kind of felt that way too.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting because they're still not willing to say it in public, but they're, kind of in the, the DMs and stuff, being very much like, oh yeah, I'm seeing some of the same problem.
Wow.
Yeah, that is that strange sort of, again, it's been noted before, but like the cult-like or religious-like, really more cult-like behavior of, because it is, cults you tend to think of being things that make you cut out people from your life. And they have these rituals and you really want to belong to this thing. So even if you disagree, you're too afraid to say anything. That's, but this is the place for free thinkers also.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of reconcile those things?
Is that kind of a thing what got you questioning the whole thing in the first place? Was it the substance of what people were saying that got you thinking, maybe I doubt this? Or was it the way in which your questions were being reacted to? Hey, we'll get back to the show in just a second. But right now, I wanted to tell you about my new book, Fake ID: How AI and Identity Ideology Are Collapsing Reality and What to Do About It. To tell you about the book, here's a short trailer. Something is deeply wrong, and we can all feel it. Culture tells us we're nothing but machines. It also tells us we're gods who can reshape reality by sheer will. Both can't be true, so it creates a kind of cultural schizophrenia where we can no longer tell what's authentic from what's artificial, and it's collapsing reality itself. But we're not machines to upgrade. We're not gods whose bodies are playthings or prisons. What we are is something the world is forgetting, but desperately needs to remember. Because only the truth about what we are can restore our sense of what's real. Okay, let's get back to the show.
So I think for me, a big turning point was 2020. So when the pandemic started and basically everything moved indoors, there was a few things that basically made possible for me. One was that it actually just pulled me out of that environment day to day. So rather than, not only being in this digital environment, but then going into an office every day where I was seeing people who were very much, steeped in the same mindset, I actually had some space and time to myself where I wasn't commuting anymore. I wasn't, doing the happy hours, all the things that you're normally doing when this is your professional work as well as your, extracurricular activities, for lack of a better term. And so that gave me space to just sort of look at the situation a little bit more, with a little bit more clarity. I think the other thing was just the sort of the disconnect between just how bad or how extreme our rhetoric had gotten and how sort of milquetoast our reactions to it were. So I was working in an organization where we were basically saying, in addition to the actual pandemic, there's this pandemic of racism. There's this potential for fascist takeover of the government. Trump is not going to concede the election. What are we going to do? It's going to be a coup. Like, we're saying all these really, really extreme things. But then a response to it was, so let's do an email petition. And so I'm just like, wait, what? You're saying that basically you think that we would be in like a civil war level almost crisis, but your response is an email petition. And so like that was literally driving me crazy. I was just like I couldn't wrap my mind around how that could be the way we were responding. There was this one meeting in particular, I remember, where there was a lot of coalition, like a coalition of a lot of these really influential organizations. So like all of those sort of brand name progressive groups that have a lot of money, pretty closely tied to the Democratic Party. We're all talking about kind of how are we going to like meet this moment. And there were a couple of us on there, myself included. And now I'm looking back on this, I'm like, ooh, I'm glad I did not win that argument. But was like basically like, oh yeah, so this is a moment where we should be pushing for a general strike. Like, if we think that the government should pay people to stay at home so we can all survive the pandemic because it's going to kill everybody and the grandma, then like we have tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars collectively represented among these groups that were earmarked for things like canvassing, house parties, rallies. All these things we're saying are irresponsible to do now because of the pandemic. So if we think that the government should pay people to stay home, why don't we do that ourselves for at least a little while to force the government to do that? And there were like 3 other people who were like, yeah. And everybody else was like, no, more petitions. Let's do more social media. And so I was like, wait a minute. If we think this is like this sort of imminent fascist takeover of the United States, why are we still clicky clacking on our computers? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so that really started me down the rabbit hole of like, wait a minute. So if this is the way we're responding to it, how much of what we're saying is even true? And so I started to, like, I'd had over the years had little pangs of misgivings here and there, but I kind of immediately silenced them. And then in 2020, I was finally like, all right, let's actually start to listen to some of those misgivings. Let's actually start to like look at how much of this is really true. And that really started to be on a years-long process of rethinking everything.